Hey, welcome to No Way Out. Many of you have been asking, how do you execute against the theories that we talk about, the theories that John Boyd talks about? We have these principles of HOP, human and organizational performance. We have the principles of Agile. We have Deming's 14 points, which John Boyd calls super standards, which all organizations should follow. But the problem with these is we do not understand the how. And today's guest is Keith McCandless. He understands the how quite a bit with Liberating Structures. Welcome to the show today, Keith. How are you?
Good. Thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it.
So I have to be honest with you, Keith. Years ago, I was living in Seattle, just moved back from Germany, and was introduced to Liberating Structures from an Agile coach, if you will, one of my mentors, Greg Myers. And he sat me down and he went through these things with me. And I was like, this is weird. All right. This is, somebody with a big ego coming out of the military, seeing this for the first time. I'm like, this doesn't seem right. But I saw the power of it in what people call design thinking and complexity thinking and leveraging the wisdom of crowds, understanding the multiple perspectives, the power of using liberating structures. So I want to thank you for bringing those to our attention over, I think it was in 2014, 2015 when the book was released. But can you give us some background on how, what problem were you trying to solve with liberating structures and what are they?
Yeah, great. Well, they are, I think the first introduction can be goofy. I'm like, what? And in part, that's because we've gone very, very, very small at the fundamental way that we relate to each other. And that basically we've inherited approaches that unwittingly over control, exclude people, and stifle innovation. And until you try, I don't expect anybody to believe that a single one of them helps until they have a chance to try them. There's no reason to believe that they would liberate you from unwitting over control, unwitting exclusion, and unwitting stifling, like what people can actually bring. Until you try them, it just doesn't make that much sense. So you mentioned Greg, and he tells a story. So I'm going to retell one of his stories about them. Before I get into what they are, you'll get a sense of what they are. So he had an opportunity. I think he mostly worked in the financial sector as an Agile coach. But he had an opportunity to work with high school students in a class. And it was about money. Like, how do you work with money if you're a young person? And so he was using a liberating structure. And I'm going to describe what he used and why he used it. So he asked the students, there's three parts. The first part was, how could you spend money? How could you work with money like a Kardashian? How could you how could money fly out in all directions? And like, let's for a minute think and make a little list of all the things you can do to use money like a Kardashian. And they did that and they laughed out loud. And they started individually and then talked to a neighbor. And this is part of the weird thing. Why would you talk to one other person? And then in a group of four, what are the best ways to have money just flow out of your hands, effortlessly? And then the second part of that, after they got all the ideas, and there's wild laughter, because this class theoretically is about how are you good with money? How do you hold on to money? How do you invest it? So forth. But the second part is, okay, what part of spending money like a Kardashian do you actually do? Like, so it comes down to earth. Like, what parts of those strategies to spend money like a Kardashian do you do? And again, they think for themselves and one other person, group of four, and they admit to themselves some of the things they do.
Mhm.
And then last is, okay, any of those things you're doing that creates the opportunity for money to just flow through your fingers and, seemingly disappear. Can you stop any one of them? Just one. Pick one. See if you can stop it. Again, turn to one person. Ask them for a little help on could I possibly stop it? Because stopping any behavior is really hard. Everybody knows it. And get some help with that. And so the idea here that Greg was brilliant at with the students is to get anywhere, to get some progress on spending your money or thinking about money differently. The most important thing is to stop doing something, eliminate a behavior that
Mhm.
will open up the space for innovation. So that's one liberating structure. Every student in that room had a completely different learning experience, and they started to think about their own behavior and maybe started to shift it. So that's what a liberating structure is. It changes a pattern of
Mhm.
interaction that's extremely productive. Yeah. So is that helpful? Helpful way to
Yeah,
start?
it is. So years ago, we learned that brainstorming doesn't necessarily work, and you need some structure to actually have that chaos or chaotic experience. And I'm going to pull from the Cynefin framework, and we'll talk a little bit about complexity in here. What I understand about chaos is that when you use it, when you put yourself in it, it costs energy, but you get innovation out of it. You get novelty out of it. What I see with the use of liberating structures is it's a shallow dive into chaos, using a term from Dave Snowden, where we use chaos to our advantage and we separate connections between people temporarily so that they can think. So think about like a think, write, share. We talk about think first, write it down, and then share it out in a liberating structure. So that's a shallow dive into chaos. We're using chaos theory to leverage the wisdom of crowds. Now, brainstorming back in the day, the way many people learned it is let's all get in a room and start talking. And you have a hippo problem, a highest paid person's opinion problem. You have anchoring, you have all these biases happening. So, what I've seen with liberating structures over the last 10 years of using them, and of course, we'll talk about UFMCS, the red teaming school, and how they brought them in, is that it actually allows you to leverage the cognitive diversity in a room, right? And that's the magic shift. There is how do we do this in a timely fashion and get the best quality information, increase the flow of ideas, so we generate something that's possibly innovative or in a safety world that's going to prevent us from failure. So that's the gigantic shift that I've seen in this. However, you have a lot more experience in this, and one of the things I want to check in with you on is the connection to complexity theory. Is this where it kind of is this where it originated from, or can you take us back in time and how you started thinking about how liberating structures connect to complex adaptive systems and systems
Yeah.
theory?
Yeah. So I was a consultant working with all different kinds of clients, and I'd worked with quality improvement, lean, systems thinking, idealized design, design thinking. Um, it just went on and on. And I had jobs where I was the director of research or learning, where I was helping other people learn these methodologies. And then I got wind of complexity science, first complex adaptive systems, and then people who thought of it as just complex systems that leaned more toward living systems than physical systems. And what happened with that is the implications of the typical sciences break things into smaller and smaller parts, get control. You're going to gain from controlling them and breaking them into smaller parts. You can predict and manage that way. Here, it's more like stir it all together with complexity. You can work with the pattern of relationships among the parts. You don't need to break the parts into smaller, but the pattern of the relationships among the parts is what's there.
Right.
So when I was describing that first example, Greg's example with the students, the pattern wasn't jump into brainstorming, each person throw their ideas out. It was think for yourself, talk to one other person, get in a group of four, and do that in a relatively fast cycle. So 1 minute to think for yourself, 2 minutes with a pair, 4 minutes together. What are the best Kardashian ways to have money slip through your fingers? Right? That's a different set of relationships, a different pattern of relationships. It's messy, as you suggest.
Right.
And yet every individual idea and the sifting and sorting that happens between the 1, the 2, and the 4 gets you to a place where you really have a deeper understanding and you're constantly thinking of your own pattern, and you're seeing this new pattern unfold in which something new, a new idea about, in this case, what we shouldn't be doing, or maybe the way you could avoid it, starts to come into play. And I think what we did with the liberating structures that was interesting is make that messiness relatively quick and very productive. That is, productive being a novel new idea for each individual comes into view, and the group as a whole enters into a particular kind of awareness that's action oriented, right? It's like
Yeah.
you can think about your own flow. When you're in a flow and you're creating something new, you're writing or doing something, and you have total focus. Well, that can happen in a group. And the liberating structures, that particular 3-step thing, the action oriented thing is, and it's all moving toward what can you stop to make space for a better way to handle your money. So the basic thing that complexity science does is flip us out of control of the parts and invites us to shift the pattern of relationships, get messier, but remain focused on drawing out the brilliance of each individual in a way that's action oriented, that results in a next step.
Yeah. So the quality of interactions, we always talk about that in complexity theory, the quality of relationships. That's what matters. And that's what we're talking about here is how do we increase that quality of interaction? My experience with 1, 2, 4 all, I think it was Greg that was the first liberating structure he shared with us up there on King Street in Seattle. And it was a little uncomfortable, right, to actually go through that because it's something that I'd never seen before. And over time, fast forward a few years, I wouldn't say I recognize, but I think several of us in the coaching community recognize that extroverts are going to have the ability to do that live, 1, 2, 4 all. But maybe an introvert might need some time to reflect on it, like overnight. I just want to get your thoughts on that. And where I'm pulling from is, I think it's Susan Cain's book, Quiet, where she talks about a lot of these things. But is a liberating structure where we throw it onto people live, is that going to be sufficient for people that need a day to reflect?
No, but it's infinitely better than not having the 1 minute for yourself. And most people it's pretty easy. I mean, I haven't seen you in 10 years. Now I'm a little bit extroverted, but I can easily have a conversation with one other person.
Right.
And so it's infinitely better and probably not enough. But these aren't for special events. I mean, you can use liberating structures as special events, but it's for every day. Let's say you do a stand-up
Right.
every day.
Right.
Well, why wouldn't you do that using 1, 2, 4 all? So your 1 can be thinking about what happened yesterday that I'm still contemplating.
Right.
So it's more a different pattern that becomes a habit over time, and you become comfortable with it. When you're first, ta-da, let's do this thing, and everyone should be deeply suspicious of the new thing that is introduced, right? Well, it has to prove itself a little the first time, and repeatedly prove itself over time.
All right, let's talk about this. Yesterday, I delivered a presentation to a large oil and gas company on a little bit about how much we're distracted by technology. 36 times an hour, I think it is, we check our email. 352 times a day, we check our phones. We lose 10 IQ points. We're just distracted all the time. When you or I come into a meeting or an event, let's just call it a meeting, because I think everybody understands. We're not a Zoom meeting, not a virtual meeting, but a meeting where everybody has their computers up and they're not listening and they're doing things. What makes liberating structures so hard is you have to put your computer down. You have to put your device down. You have to be present, correct? And that's a big shift now. When you walk in and you introduce this type of thing, that's not the way they're used to working. They're used to being distracted, chasing that dopamine rush, if you will. So if you're going to be successful as an organization, you have to slow down a little bit. And that's why I like liberating structures. The downside to liberating structures, from my perspective, is I'll go back to it. It's an ego thing, right? This is weird. This is weird having somebody tell me I need to not talk to my neighbor. I need to write down something. And then we're going to be silent. We're going to go have conversations with one another in a 1, 2, 4 all. Or another one another example that I like is using the fishbowl in a retrospective, or even listening to a customer, right, or customers. But even setting that up requires energy not from just the facilitator, but energy from the participants, because it's new. Tell me where I'm wrong, or what you can add to those statements there, Keith.
Well, the thing that the book and the practice, the thing that you gain over time as you use them is the selection of the challenge that what's the purposeful, important, yet you need everybody to figure it out, and how you articulate that, the purposeful challenge that you're going to address. And you do it, not only we're going to address this, but you're going to make a statement about what's possible. So each liberating structure has quite a bit about what's possible when you use it. So let's take the user experience fishbowl, or what, maybe wise crowds would be better. And so we're going to do this activity. And the reason we're going to use it, so this is how I would start anything. The reason we're going to use it is because we want to make explicit what users are experiencing in the field, so that we can bring it into our delivery. And that's not the best one. Let's see what another one would be. Well, that first one I described, the Kardashian thing, it's like, we're going to do this activity, and the reason we're doing it is so that we can stop behaviors and make space for innovation in how you work with money. So do you want to do that? If you don't want to do that, that's what we're going to do. So if you're leading, and when you're getting started with this, you are probably the individual person who's going to need to think that through and say the words. Right. After that, other people can do it. But you have to pick a topic, and you need to say, we're going to address it in a way that makes it possible for us to stop some things so that we make space for innovation. Or that we're doing this fishbowl so that we bring experience from the field directly into what we'll do next.
Right.
And then I usually don't say put down your devices or turn them off. I could, but it wouldn't be useful. For the first experience, you pretty quickly, it's going to be different. But the main thing that's going to make a difference and get people to at least listen is they'll be invited to do something immediately, like write your questions as you're listening to people talk, write your questions in chat. Let's say it's virtual. Or you need to give everybody something to do almost immediately.
Right. Yep.
And those two things, the purposeful challenge and give somebody an active role immediately, creates the opportunity for you to break through all of the noise.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that helps you, but that's usually
it's very helpful. Yeah.
Where it is. And there's usually somebody, like if Greg is in the room, if Greg was with you and some other people and other people hadn't done the thing, I'd ask Greg for a brief, like, what did you use it for? What did you get? What did those high school students do after you did this thing that we're about to do?
Yeah. Yeah. And I will tell you, I have seen people push back on this immediately and then minutes later see the value in it. Right. So you take them on the journey, they get the value, and then they go, we're sold on this. That's how you hook them on doing, continuing to do it on their own.
Well, one thing early on, before there was a book or anything, somebody came up to me and said, thanks for the respect. Immediately, I could see that you actually wanted me to participate. You wanted to hear. I had a way to contribute immediately, and you respected it. We can't solve this problem, or we can't make progress on this challenge without you. And that's why I'm asking you to think for a minute, even to say, think for a minute on your own before we get into this, because it's hard. We're going to have to find our way through. And it's respect. And people can feel it. If you feel it and you believe it, then they'll feel it too. Yeah.
We talk about weak signal detection, and some of the examples we use are inattentional blindness. We only see what we expect to see. So we'll take people through those experiences where they can see kids dribbling a basketball and the gorilla walk across the stage, or there's many examples that we can use. We can use Mooney pictures. We can use Adelson's checkerboard. We can use all these things. What that shows individuals and groups is that people, a minority number of people in your group, see things that the majority do not see, right? And what liberating structures allows us to do is to go after those weak signals that rough numbers, 17% to 20% of people see things that others don't see. And it's not the same people. It's just you and I are going to notice different things. But we use that to leverage the neuroscience, the physics, and I guess the complexity science behind all this, and say, okay, this is a truth. Liberating structures, a basic thing like think, write, share, and into let's see, 5 will get you 25, is a good thing. It's going to leverage the diversity of the group. And if it's 20 people or 50 people or 500 people, we could do it to some extent. But that's the value of this, is we're going to find those weak signals. I can't remember if you ever talked about weak signal detection with liberating structures or not. Have you?
Well, we avoided almost all theory in the book. So they're built in, because most people don't care. And I always love talking about it because that's what inspired me, but it doesn't work for a variety of reasons for lots of others. So I don't do much of it. But let's take, for example, critical uncertainties. It's all about weak signals. So what are the two biggest critical and uncertain things about your business, your activity, whatever it may be? And so let's say you're an international NGO and they identify off the top, well, we don't know how many people are going to be dislocated, whether it's everywhere in the world they'll be dislocated, or it'll just be kind of local in spots. And we don't know whether our organization will have capital or very little or a lot. So one way to get at weak signals would be say, divide a group into smaller groups and say, one of there's 4 futures here, and we want you to make it believable that we're going to get into a place where there's dislocation worldwide. I mean, people really need your help. You're an international NGO, and you don't really have many resources. Well, what are you going to do? Is the final point. But before that, what would the world create? A world in which there's some breaking news, there's some conditions in the economy, there's things. Create a world in which it's believable that there's dislocation everywhere and we don't have really much money. And through creating this world which it's believable, you get at all these weak signals by imagining. So I would say there's a lot more differentiation, a lot more different kinds of ideas in people when they use their full imagination, more than 17%, right? So they're imagining this world. They kind of can believe that, yeah, that's a future that could happen. It's an extreme version of what's critical and uncertain about our future as an international NGO. So now, with those signals, imagine what your strategy is. What are you going to do to be successful as maybe you're into food security? This particular NGO is just about food. You have enough food to eat. Well, what are you going to do if there's that much dislocation and you can't pay for the food yourself? Like, what are your strategies? So all of a sudden, it's not just the weak signals that you could get about dislocation, or the weak signals that your flow of money through philanthropies or governments is going to decrease. It's also the hint. Hint is like a weak signal or a hunch about strategies moving forward. So that's a liberating structure. It's called critical uncertainties, and it taps both the once you've imagined that world, and you have 3 other groups imagining different futures, which are also extreme, you have a whole set of weak signals to pay attention to. And out of all of those, you develop some strategies that are just robust. We should do all whatever future holds. That's a strategy. And then some hedging strategies, which are just in case we get that really dark future. And we started to see signals of that. Here's what we would do. And we need to invest in that hedge. There's other kinds of strategy like anti-fragile, but basically that's the way built into particular liberating structures are the weak signaling, skillfulness on weak signals. Is that helpful?
So
example?
There's it's very helpful. In fact, you brought up hedging, you brought up optionality. This kind of leads into red teaming as well, which we may get into. The idea that going back to the human sensor network, when we talk about that, we usually are looking at how do we identify risks, or what are the leading indicators to risk in a complex environment where we can't plan ahead. We can't identify them beforehand. So it's taking the liberating structures that we may teach in a workshop and applying them throughout the life cycle of an organization or product or whatever. And, and in the safety critical world, we'll use them to help identify weak signals and leading indicators to emerging risks. So I'm not sure how your relationship with the safety community has been since you started this, but have you worked with the safety community or resilience or anything like that?
We cut our teeth on superbug infection control in hospitals. And I don't know if that's it's safety oriented work. And we kind of moved out of infection control into related things in healthcare, which are falls and medication errors. And did some work on simple rules or minimum specifications for how to address safety challenges. So, for example, and I don't know, is that safety? Are we still talking about?
Of course it is.
Okay.
that to me, healthcare in surgical teams, actually up in Seattle, we've had Dr. Lowe on the show, who uses a lot of lessons from aviation crew resource management, which leverages a lot of these ideas as well. So we do know that there's the team science is borrowing from your work in liberating structures, we call it red teaming, to enable teams to identify um, threats, weak signals, and things like that. So yes, healthcare is a huge industry that's taking this on.
Well, just a little story. Um, my first hint about this was a children's hospital, and they had policies and they were trying to get the weak signals and all of that. But the thing they really did that was brilliant were simple rules. So yeah, there's procedure, and we're trying to, we fail safe everything and all of that. But what made the biggest difference was that each individual, this is a more distributed way to change the pattern of relationships. So a distributed way. So any person, as they're completing their task, if they see something that puts a patient at risk, they have three things to do, and they have complete right to do it. And the first one is stop the line.
Yep.
They see it looks like this vial is mislabeled. Whoa, stop. They have the right to do it. And that, they may not be the manager, they may not be in charge of anything, but they noticed it. So that's the simple rule, number one. Second one is fix it right there if you can, and record the fact that there was this problem. If you can fix it right there,
Right.
do that and record it. And the third one, for anything that isn't fixable, you need to find somebody to address that and also record it. And so that set of three simple rules were one level up from all the policies, all the things that it's a very distributed way to solve safety problems.
Right.
And in healthcare, it kind of the idea had come out of manufacturing, I think, first to stop the line. But in the safety context of a really complex healthcare setting, it's different. So, and yeah, the idea of rules of thumb or heuristics for in the middle of things that are fully distributed to each individual, I think those are underappreciated in lots of settings.
Yeah, heuristics are great. In aviation, we had aviate, navigate, communicate. So get away from the ground, find where you're going, and then tell somebody what's going on. Right. So those things kept us alive quite a bit. So heuristics and rules of thumbs are great. Hey, I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk.
We're covering a lot of territory, and I like that. I hope it works for you. Yeah.
No, I love it. Psychological safety and liberating structures. I want to get your thoughts on that right now. Are they the same, different, just based on your experience and what you know? Example from a surgical team. Because we got to admit some type of fallibility, some type of failure in front of guests or in front of your peers. I think what you just shared with me, the language makes it easier to share than saying something like, I failed you at this, right? Okay. So I think
prompts,
there's something here we can improv on and yeah.
The prompts are, and you don't have to share what you write. The other thing, the safe part is you just respond to the prompts, and they're going to provoke you, though. They will. If you respond to them, they'll bring things up. So you have to, as things come up, like we have other safety, like we have always one person in the room that's there if you need to walk off with someone else and just talk to them and cry or do whatever you're going to do. Yeah. There's somebody here who's there for you. But those prompts are not just four separate things. They're progressive.
Right.
They all lead into each other. And so there's different ones that could work for different settings, like a retrospective. There's lots of good ones for, we do what, so what, now what, which is what happened, what are the facts, what are the evidence, Well, so what? Given that evidence, what of that evidence is important? Or do you have a hypothesis based on that? What do you make out of that evidence is the so
Mhm.
what. And then the now what is what's the next step that follows from the what? The evidence,
Yep.
what you made of it, and what you're going to do. So that's your typical retrospective for us, is to break those into three progressive elements.
I have a huge question for you, and this is
Yeah.
there's a reason I'm asking this. You started with what happened, right? Can you explain to us why that's so important to start with? Not necessarily start the debrief with what happened, but have it included in there what happened. Can you explain why you chose those words?
Well, if you don't, here I'll go to the. If you don't do it, what you'll get is people sharing what they want to do next, and that ends
A
almost
belief.
immediately
Yeah.
goes to what we call a goat rodeo, which is two people fighting over uh, what they think should happen, and they have not shared what evidence led to it, and they haven't compared the different views of the evidence that are in the different people in the room. So until you've shared the evidence and sorted and sifted it,
Yes.
jumping, well, I think of the ladder of inference, which is, maybe you know it, but it's
Mhm.
all, it defines how we think, and we think so quickly we don't notice this is how we think, but we're always gathering evidence, and we very quickly assign meaning to undifferentiated reality. I'm looking around like this because I'm noticing different things, and without having to think, I'm assigning meaning to some of the elements. I pick out some, and then I say, well,
Mhm.
that means, wow, it's going to be nice later today. I don't want to work. Um, or maybe it's possible I can reschedule something. And that's the so what. But
Yeah.
if there's more people in the room, each is looking at evidence and assigning some different kind of meaning to it, which is a couple rungs up the ladder. And then finally, but in a split second in our heads, we go to what action is required, right? We
Right.
don't really have to pay attention to the evidence gathering or the conclusion making or hypothesis making. We just go right to the top. And the
Right.
second you do that, you get into a stupid misunderstanding.
Yeah. So misremembering the past will not improve the future. We hear that from like Annie Duke writes that all the time. So, and I want to. This is critical because we've been having these conversations in the safety industry that you need to understand what happened. That's why we're using liberating structures to understand from multiple perspectives what happened, because the way we experience reality is constructed top down, inside out. We talk about that on the show. We used John Boyd Doodle to help explain that. So everything you just went through is absolutely critical in and like again, you have more experience than I do in this space. The ladder of inference is key in this. We don't like to go into what went well because the attitudes and beliefs start emerging of what we should do in the future without knowing what happened in the past. And this is critical. So I'm going to combine a few things here. We talk about Ensley's situational awareness, level one, level two, level three, and to simplify it, what happened, what's happening, and what could happen in the future, right? You can't determine what could happen in the future unless you know what's happening now. So being present. And the only way you can be present if you understand what happened in the past. And we talk about this when we in fighter aviation. In order for us to accelerate human performance in the cockpit.
Well, the pandemic really brought out so much more about psychological safety. And so in the last 5 years, new liberating, so we wrote about 33 in the book. There's a whole bunch of new ones created by users all over the world, and
Mhm.
they're great. And many of them have uh, a, help a person come into the work in a way that helps them to feel safer about their participation. So I'll give you an example, a pretty extreme example of one I've been working on, and I'm very excited about it. But it's called grief walking. I don't know if you've
Okay.
run
Let's see.
into it, but it's purpose, the thing that it makes possible, is to tap into social support after a loss.
Okay.
Any loss. And the first time that it was trialed in a Seattle user group with Greg Myers in the room, I think he was there. We had maybe 30 people, and one of the participants had been losing his sight slowly. And the way grief walking starts is everybody in the room finishes 4 sentences, and I'm still talking about psychological safety here, about a loss. So the first one is, yes, it is true that, some loss. They fill it in. It is hard because I'll always remember and never forget. Fill in the sentence. And last is, now that I've had a chance to write about or talk about my grief, my loss, it may be possible too. So everybody has written that down.
Okay.
And then this is the safety part, the psychological safety. Would anyone like to walk their loss, walk their grief? And what that means is you take what you've written and you'll walk around the room to 4 different groups. We'll divide the group into 4. And you'll walk around the room and read to the first group of people the first response. Yes, it is true that. And this particular person in the user group, in our group, said, yes, it is true that I'm just about blind. Right? And I was walking him. There's a guide for this. I'm walking with him. And I don't know what he's written. I have no idea. But he's decided to, I'm going to walk it. And then anybody in that group can, if they're moved by what he said, they're invited to walk with us to the next station. And they have the option of putting hand on his shoulder or not. And he can say yes. And he said yes. And so now he's got me and one other person walking to the next group. And he reads out his second thing, which is, it's hard because sight is so dear to me. It guides me in everything I do. And he walked through the whole circle. And of course, he had like 7 or 8 people with hands on his shoulders as he's walking around. And then there's an opportunity to hear. I ask, well, why did you walk? Why did you choose to walk with this person? And they say, well, I've also had a loss, and you hear from all the people that walked with him. Then you hear from the person who decided to tap social support in regard to their loss, and say, and this particular person said, I've never felt more supported, more. I don't think the word comforted was used, but what we were trying to design there, and it's been used now all over in lots of different settings in which people have had really big losses. It could be at work, this team left, or I lost my position, or I'm dying, or any number of like unbelievably hard things. It actually does the thing. It taps social support for a pretty profound set of losses. And the reason we were even trying this was the recognition that there's been so much loss. And typically what we do is separate that person. And this goes right back to the complexity science. Let's take their loss in that person and get them a counselor, rather than distribute, have a distributed way to tap the social support that's there. And can the pattern of including people in someone's loss provide something of great value? So it's the most extreme value of providing psychological safety for the hardest moment in somebody's life, or could be the hardest moment, when they've experienced a loss. So did that get after your question?
Let's build on this more. So as you're walking through grief walking, it kind of reminds me of things that are possible inside an effective retrospective or debrief, where a leader could bring up a shared experience. Just as true that I failed to put my mask on during pre-op, right? And just use an example. We have to look back at what happened, so you can pay attention to what's happening now the next time you go do it, so you can improve your thought process on what's going to happen in the future, right? And that's how we accelerate performance in the aircraft. So I want to thank you for that. I've been trying to find a way to explain exactly what you just gave us for the last year and a half, because people have been asking me, and that's a huge help there, Keith. Thank you so much for that. But on the liberating structures in planning, execution, and assessment or debrief or retrospective, the team life cycle, we use these everywhere. I mean, once we show people how to use them, and we invite them to use them, don't get me wrong, we don't force it upon them. It's up to them to actually want to use them and see the value out of them, right? So we can't force this on anybody, but we know it works when the teams pick up on it and execute. I'm going to ask you a question next, which leads to executives in a large organization. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I had Chris Clearfield on, who wrote Meltdown. I think you worked with Chris a couple of times in Seattle. He lives out there, but he's using liberating structures quite a bit. And I asked him the same question, and that is, how do you get executives, people that know everything, or have big egos, to actually use liberating structures? Keith, how do you do that?
You pick a moment, and it can be a brief moment, where there's undeniable confusion. And there's a few people that are interested in the ideas and the theory and more distributed systems, but it's rare. So usually I'm invited in when there's something that's happened that's confusing, and there have been repeated attempts and repeated failures to address it. And then the whole repertoire of liberating structures makes sense. And I'm trying to think of a time when there's usually an event. There's one thing that's out of control, or it's confusing. And if we can make progress on that, then there's the question, what else could we use this for? So lots of times when whatever the client, and I'm a consultant, and usually this is, somebody who's asking for help on this difficult thing. And I'll say, well, we're going to make progress on that, clearly. And the way we do it will change forever how you address all future challenges. And that's an incredibly bold statement, and I'm 100% confident in saying it. And partly, if we don't make progress on that thing that they came forward with, it won't go anywhere. It's not going to continue. It's not going to be something they bring into their daily work. It's not going to be a new pattern that changes the culture of the organization. So a recent really big Fortune 50 company was working on virtual, what are we going to do about bringing people back to work, was kind of, and so we can't figure it out. But the top leadership was kind of like, no, we like face-to-face. So after a little bit of trying to address how could we make virtual online work better, it was clear that really didn't matter to them. We're gonna get back to work. I mean, we'll make some adjustments for the highly valuable people that are technical, that We'll give them more privileges to work from wherever they want, but we're not going to. No, we're really not going to take any action on the thing that they invited Liberating Structures to help them with. So pretty quickly, I could see that this was not purposeful, not something that was going to make a difference. And Liberating Structures weren't going to become something the executives do because they didn't really care about the challenge.
Yeah.
So that sounds... I think there has to be something. And so we've been pretty successful when an entire business has come to a plateau. Like our business model has stalled out. We don't really know what to do or how to move forward next. And I'm more interested in that situation than I am in a project-oriented thing. Like doing a design sprint with Liberating Structures, that's great. Maybe that influences something else, but it often sort of just stays at that project level. So I'm not answering your question very directly because it's very contextual.
Yeah. And
there's a certain set of conditions that make it hard. It's so pervasive. Because we're, at least when I started, and we could have started the interview with this, but the 5 dominant patterns, we fall back to them all the time. Even if you find Liberating Structures great, we're going to fall back to a presentation. One person is shaping what happens next, right? It's not a distributed thing. We do report outs, which are, there's an expectation for what the boss wants to hear or what the leader wants to hear, and you're going to pretty much deliver on that expectation. You're not going to bring anything new or interesting in. You might go so far as to do a brainstorm, but that's going to be really separate from people close to the challenge usually. And it's going to be very conceptual, no link to whatever it is. And then when you throw up your hands and you've got nothing else, you'll do an open discussion, which ends up in that problem where stupid misunderstandings happen. And we call it a goat rodeo because it's amusing, but basically 2 or 3 people get into a fight over something fairly ridiculous, which is their opinion. And so if that's all we have, those are pretty much the dominant patterns that we have, and we fall back to them. And the leaders in particular got there not through distributing control. They got there through, and you can really go amazing places without distributing control. You can have a big thing. It's just not adaptable. When there's a disruption, you are in a bad way. And that's why I was really looking forward to you, because every time I've worked with anybody with, in the military, or it has a field operation that's as changeable as what happens in lots of military situations, they get the relationship between the field, a more distributed approach to planning and decision making and sense making and all of those things is really, from the top, they get that. Which isn't necessarily true in lots of settings. So I feel like I'm complaining about it now, but go ahead.
Maybe there's an illusion of the fact that we get it in the military. I think that's, having been at the senior level of the military, I'd say it is an illusion, right?
Well,
at the operational level, at the technical level.
Don't ruin my dreamy transference over to you.
No, and speaking of the military, this is critical. We've had Colonel Stephen Rodkoff Stephen Rodkoff on the show, who stood up the UFMCS, University of Foreign Military and Cultural Studies, the red teaming school, right? So they used maybe like 7 or 8 different liberating structures in that guide. I think my 15%, and we just took a look. Yeah, it's 1, 2, 4, all, 5 gets you 25, fishbowl, and more. Well-referenced material that references your work, And when we talk about red teaming, we're actually being inclusive of liberating structures, because for us, when we do a red teaming, which is how do we leverage cognitive diversity within a system, um, we want and mitigate cognitive biases. We want to give teams and organizations those structures to do that, right? And it's there's no one size fits all approach. And there's context is going to drive a lot of what we do. We'll add things like Dave Snowden's ritual descent that looks a lot like the ad agency. I think it's called Troika Troika Consulting.
Triz,
I think it's called
Triz or Troika. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Triz,
yeah.
probably Triz.
Yeah. So these things you can kind of mix and match them. But my point behind this is the military saw the need to leverage, the diversity of the group. So we stood up UFMCS, and they borrowed and referenced your work. And now I know you're familiar with that, right?
A little. The work has
Okay.
spread so far and so wide, I cannot keep up. So
Okay.
I'd like to know more, and because I'm writing a new book, I'm trying to make the intersections more explicit, and I want to
Mhm.
continue a little with you about like what are more specifically you're using different language, but it's the same thing. And
Yes.
so the
Yep.
intersection is important to me. And most of the new liberating structures uh, have come out of the intersections and the different domains in which the work has been used.
Yeah.
Uh, and we don't have a closed system, it's wide open. So,
Right. Right.
what you're telling me about red teaming, I love every word. I love the way you're describing it. I can't
Yeah.
get enough of it. And I'm
Mm.
sure that in there are things that I never imagined, but we aren't going to get
Yeah.
to right now.
Right.
you know,
So we mix and match everything. So we'll do like a Wardley map to understand the external environment. We'll use red teaming techniques to do that. In a virtual environment, we'll do the same thing because things like the Miro board gives us ability to think, right, share, and move things around. And you can actually do dot voting, and you can actually set up 5, get you 25 in there, and all that. Same thing with the Microsoft Teams. I remember when we went virtual a few years ago. I was completely against doing anything online, and then we had to do it. So we had to come up with ways of how do you actually set up um, how do you provide input to a group, or how does an individual provide information to a group where others can't see it, right? And there are ways to do that on Microsoft Teams and Zoom and things like that. So liberating structures, in my view, survive the transition to virtual environment, and they can survive the hybrid environment as well. I mean, I don't care if I have 25 people in the room and 50 people online. I can still do the same thing. It's pretty powerful for the most part. So a lot of positive things to say about your work there from what we do. And I just want to give you an opportunity to ask questions on anything that we covered today, or anything that may interest you.
yeah. Well, one thing I'm writing extensively with a partner about online.
Mhm.
So I don't think we could get to it here completely, but how you've adapted things online, a lot of some of the bridges between the domains, which were easier, well, at least easier for me because I was flying all over the world, and there were user groups connected, Liberating Structures user groups connected from all over the world. And some of that with the pandemic, some of the bridges cracked a bit or disappeared. Um, I'd love to take some time with you and look at some of the online adaptations that you've made. Uh, and
Yeah.
it's very selfish because I'm writing about it now, and we've done some exciting things, but I'm sure that there are places where your online work will add to my understanding of what's possible.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example, and this came from the red teaming school. Think, write, share is to me is foundational to all the structures out there. Think about it, write it down, and then we'll communicate it out in a way. In the virtual environment, we turn that into think, chat, send. right? So put it in chat, but not the chat that, right? But not the chat where everybody can see it. Send it to a facilitator, one person who can collate all the information and see it, right? And the reason for that is just like we do in a face-to-face in situation, when we think about something and write it down, I can't see what everybody wrote down until we run through the liberating structure. So we want to create that same environment. So think, write, share became think, chat, send. And we taught Scrum Masters and Agile coaches how to do that, and it worked quite well. And then we picked up Miro and Mural and all the whiteboards out there to help us with it. So it was a great transition. It really was.
That's cool. I laughed out loud because I just love the sound of it, and I can see it in print already.
Yeah.
One thing we've done, and I don't know if this is appropriate for the show, but like those prompts for grief walking. Yes, it is true that it's hard because they also could be related to your strategy. So in chat, you can write, to make progress, what we must resist is, and people, it could be 100 or 200 or any number, what we must resist is to make progress, and then you see, everybody sees each other's, it's in chat. And the second one would be what needs to make progress, what we need to invent or create from new is, and you get a bunch of things. And then to make space for the new things, what we must stop doing is, and just whatever the prompts are, you have it all in chat. You can grab that entire chat, put it in Miro, make Post-it notes out of everything. And if it's too many people for you to do it yourself, in about 20 seconds, you can have your AI assist can create what are the 3 salient themes for what we must resist, what we must stop, and what we want to invent, what we imagine can invent. And so that's a lot like think, share, send. Share, think? No, what was it again?
Think, chat,
Think,
send, right?
chat, send.
Chat,
That's a lot
send,
like it, except the send is visual. So you have visual control over the themes, then each idea is both a Post-it note, but you could also ask, or you could do it yourself, participants clump, affinitize into similar, and let's name those clumps of similar things to resist, similar things to. So what I love about the online and what I want to learn from other people is, how do you do that? How do you include people in thinking more deeply, articulating in a way that can be made visual and organized into themes that imply you're going to do something? Because unless you make that connection, it doesn't have to be immediately. There's lots of things that spark the slow imagination of a person that isn't going to immediately, but what's a first next step out of these themes that just got generated on this whiteboard that we can return to until, that I like the idea of each meeting is a liftoff from where you left off the last time. So suddenly you have this digital record of your thinking, and some sort of Kanban-y kind of way to address what's revealed. So anyway, I'm blathering, but that's the kind of
this
thing,
is great. No,
the detail. I want to know, how did you do that? Because that's what go ahead.
I've got it. So everything you just talked about, you got a couple things: AI and the use of liberating structures. I haven't thought about that, but you're right. That's spot on. But one of the problems we're trying to solve is, how do we move away from checklists into complex environments where we have to provide some scaffolding for leaders to think about a problem, a strategic problem. And I think the prompts you kind of walk through married up with something we call like dime fill, diplomatic, information, military, economic, financial, infrastructure, legal, allow us to marry these two worlds and think strategically. So I'm gonna play noodle around with that over the next couple of weeks to see what we get out of it. But this is why these conversations are so important. It's not, I hate to tell everybody why do we have these conversations? It's so we can learn. That's
Is
the big
there
secret
anyone
here.
else here? I don't see anyone else here.
Well, I mean this is why we do it. Most people think it's for whatever. There's so much learning happening here. I just want to thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, Keith, this has been awesome. We'll definitely do this again. But do you have any thing you want to share with our guests about what you're doing next? You brought up a new book, some new ideas on liberating structures. Anything else you want to share?
Well, there's user groups spread out around. I could send you some links to user groups that are online for the most part, but the face-to-face ones are starting up again. You are in which town now?
I'm in Virginia Beach.
So, okay. I don't think there's anything right there. But so that's one way. I like to give people a chance to learn more. For the book, we kind of have an open, once a month, we're going to be prototyping some online thing that we've created, either a revision of a existing liberating structure or an entirely new one that's well suited to online. So once a month, there'll be a hour or 90-minute session where we're prototyping, and anybody is invited that wants to, and I'll send you a link about that.
Okay.
And that will be a little messy, but we're not going to prototype anything we don't think is awesome already or half awesome. Could be made more awesome. And then, yeah, we have a Slack group. There's all sorts of little things. I'll send you some details about.
Okay.
If people
We'll
want to do more, that you can attach to whatever. But those are the main things, I think. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, just
well,
delightful
Keith,
to talk with you. It's like, okay, we're syncing up.
Yeah, no, this is we have these conversations with other coaches all the time about anything. Folks that came up with like Dave Snowden or Nigel Thurlow or John Turner. We have folks that come on the show that have deep knowledge in flow systems from a physical standpoint or the neuroscience behind things. So what we're trying to do here is just kind of show everybody that you need to have a beginner's mindset to really understand how to adapt in this world. And again, liberating structures, without that beginner's mindset, I would never have picked them up. I would have ran away from them. So you're not always going to be an expert in everything. So it's okay to bring in something that seems a little weird, but I guarantee you, liberating structures are life-changing for organizations.
Yeah, great.
Appreciate your time, Keith. I'm going to keep you on for a moment, but thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.